Mr. Varoufakis, let me kick it off with you. Thank you for joining us. What do you make of this migration deal?
Well, there is no deal, really. This is another typical European Union fudge. They've agreed on a phrasing, and they celebrated it in order to hide the fact that there was no agreement on the substance. Let us remind ourselves why they gathered in Brussels. They gathered to discuss two issues. One is the reform of the Dublin Agreement. In other words, of the rule that says that the country that receives an asylum seeker, a migrant, must deal with this person internally. Therefore, a rule which was never designed to cope with the mass migration flows that we experienced in 2015. And that was meant to be discussed with a view to reforming it. And the second question, the one that Angela Merkel was desperately to resolve, the question of what they call secondary migration. You mentioned before the CSU, the Bavarian part of the Christian Democratic family within the German government, demanding
right.
And even putting in jeopardy the German government,
right.
Chancellor
but
Merkel's
Mr.
government, demanding the right.
Fudge,
yes.
Yeah, but fudge or no fudge, they have a deal, and that puts the European project in a better place than it was 2 weeks ago. Is that fair?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Look, a deal that actually addresses the problems that they gathered to resolve would indeed have improved the prospects of the European Union project. But a deal which is only a deal in name but not in substance, and does not deal with these two issues, the Dublin Agreement reform and the secondary migration issue, which is threatening the very existence of the German government, not having a deal on that is not putting things on a better pedestal. And let me say that the one thing they agreed upon is absolutely despicable. They agreed to subcontract the problem to countries, failed states like Libya, to authoritarian regimes like Turkey, and this amounts to a declaration, a dereliction of duty by the European Union. It's like treating human beings, refugees, as pawns, lacking human rights, and returning them, or actually paying the traffickers effectively in order to hold them in what is nothing more than glorified concentration camps, given the failure of the European Union to agree to a policy of settling these refugees, those who do manage to get the status of refugees within the European Union. It is a complete failure of the European Union, which is packaged as a success. But that is not new, is it?
Wonderful to have you back on again. You are a Minister of Finance of Greece. What do you do when they show up on your shores? On the many islands of Greece, I want to know operationally, what do you do when refugees and migrants show up on the Greek shores?
You make sure that they are picked out of the water and they don't drown, that you tend to their wounds, that you give them warm clothing, that you feed them, that they are safe, that you deal with their severe physical and psychological injuries. And then you turn to your European partners and you say, if we are going to have a European Union, folks, how about dealing with this not as a problem of Lesbos, or Lampedusa, or Calabria, but as a problem of the European Union? There is no refugee crisis in Europe. There is a European Union crisis, because we don't really have a European Union that deals with its problems collectively and in a solidaristic manner.
You're making it easy for me to do the old Segui here, Yanis Varoufakis, and that is over to your Project Syndicate essay, which I read very carefully this morning. Here is Varoufakis, folks, and he nails exactly what I thought when I saw the debt workout of the other day. Since 2010, Greece's creditors have been practicing this extend and pretend strategy as though they were training for an Olympic event. Instead of a courageous and therapeutic haircut or the moderate GDP indexing solution, the Eurogroup's recent decision, and he moves on to say, boiled down to the apotheosis, that's Greek, folks, apotheosis of this cynical practice. Yanis, I thought the same thing. I was stunned there was no haircut on this debt workout. Would you explain why? Why is there no haircut like there was in South America and every other national debt workout I've ever seen?
Well, before I answer your excellent question, let me point out that it's not just you and I who are agreeing. There is also an organization called the International Monetary Fund that has not signed up to this deal, which continues to raise issues about debt sustainability. The IMF is the only international organization that is capable of doing a half-decent job at compiling a debt sustainability analysis, and they themselves look at the deal that the European Union, another fudge that they managed to concoct the last week, and they don't want to have anything to do with it. Coming to your question, the reason is just purely political. Governments in Germany, always headed by Chancellor Merkel, since 2010, have said to their members of parliament in the Bundestag, in the federal parliament in Berlin, that these loans are loans for the Greek government and they are going to be repaid fully and with interest in the long term. They knew that that was not the case because the Greek state was bankrupt, and no bankruptcy can be overcome through more loans, especially when the loans come attached with heavy austerity that shrink the income base from which those loans will be repaid. In other words, to put it bluntly, Mrs. Merkel has consistently lied to her members of parliament. And as you know, no politician likes to go back to parliament and admit that they had lied to parliament, especially when the said politician is Chancellor Merkel, who happens to be at her weakest position in the history of her tenure, and is just desperately hanging on for dear life.
Yeah. We're just listening to the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, actually having stopped by a reporter. So what happens is they go into the red carpet, for those listening to you on radio, and then the President Macron decided to give a couple of words to reporters there waiting for him. We did hear from Monsieur Barnier a couple of minutes ago, and actually he was speaking in English. One of the first times that I heard the commissioner speak in English. We're monitoring everything that comes out of the President of France speaking to reporters right now. Mr. Varoufakis, I have a viewer question saying, please ask him, Mr. Varoufakis, if the markets, so the banks and the stock markets, are better after your 2015 negotiation.
Well, you read the reports about the stress tests of the Greek banks. And the only reason why they passed those stress tests is because the criteria have been lowered sufficiently so that they would pass the stress tests. If they had applied the 2015 criteria, 3 of the 4 banks would have failed them. Look, no banking system can be declared solvent when more than 50% of its loan book is in the red. They are non-performing loans. And to pretend that this mountain of non-performing loans, due to the depression, to the economic depression of this country, can be overcome through selling to various funds those loans at 8-9% of face value and forcing auctions in a real estate market where prices are on the floor anyway. Any such proposition is going to fail the basic criteria of common sense. And indeed, this is part of the same fudge, of the same extending and pretending that the Greek state is not bankrupt, pretending that the Greek banks have passed the stress tests, pretending that an economy which is in a state of permanent depression can come out of it through gigantic surpluses in the budget, primary surpluses of 3.5% for the next 5 years and 2.2% for the next 40 years. Now that is a crime against logic. Let's end this. Let's stop pretending that the crisis has been overcome just because we declared it finished.
Mr. Varoufakis, our John Micklethwaite, our editor-in-chief, spoke at length with Mr. Tsipras the other day. You're one of the few people that spans Greek politics. You work for Papandreou, you work for Tsipras, and you've got a real understanding of domestic Greece. Tell me where the business elites fit into Greece over the next 5 to 10 years. Can the business elites work within the fractious domestic politics of Greece?
Look, there's a very sharp division amongst Greek businesses.
Yes.
There are businesses that are trying to do their best and which are struggling to survive, and they're doing a splendid job in an environment which is very hostile to them. You know about the terrible bureaucracy, but of course the tax regime, the tax rates per se, you know, you have 29% corporate tax in Greece. And also, no, this is the worst part, an obligation to prepay next year's estimated corporate tax this year in an environment where the banks are not even lending to anyone. There are some heroes amongst this business community that are managing to continue functioning along the lines of the private sector criteria. And then there are other businesses that have been bankrupt for a long time. They are part of the oligarchy. They are kept alive and very powerful through the toxic loans that are coming from a troika. And I'm afraid that this predatory, bankrupt, insolvent sector of business, the malignant part of the business community in Greece, is making it very hard for the heroes amongst the business community to excel.
Mr. Varoufakis, I've got one more question. It's the most important question of the day. We at Bloomberg Surveillance will have a surveillance wedding in Greece next year. Which island in Greece would you get married on?
Well, I did get married on an island. It's called the island of Egina, which is actually where I'm going in a couple of hours, and I can't wait. It is a very off-the tourist trail island, but I would suggest you do it in Santorini because it's much more Bloomberg.
Right. Oh, it's much more Bloomberg. Thank you. Yanis Varoufakis, look for your invitation in the mail. Mr. Varoufakis, of course, a former Greek finance minister.